everybody? We are here, the Only You podcast. I'm in the home office today, and of course, Dr. Tino in his office. And you see the title of the show today: "The Party of Putin, Disinformation, and Mental Health." We've talked about disinformation in the past. Of course, we always gear this toward mental health and wellness. But the Party of Putin, what does that mean, Doctor?
Well, we're going to take a little turn away from exclusively staying within the confines and boundaries of psychiatry and step a little bit outside of that so we can make the connection between radicalism, right, and mental health. And we can't make the connection without talking about uh, the party of Putin, which is basically another way of calling it Trumpism, right?
Hmm.
And I don't want to just connect it directly to the Republican Party. I had to confess, I was a Republican for a long time. I'm not a Republican anymore. I left the party and I used to contribute to a lot of Republican causes, um, which I don't anymore. But I'm an independent. So I have probably leanings toward being a libertarian, if you may. But I have to put my other hat on, which is being a psychiatrist, right? And having lived and survived to Trumpism, with Trump in the White House, and having to deal with so much delusional, irrational thinking. And by that, I mean psychiatrically and scientifically, what I mean is define the facts, right? That the facts hit you in the face and you negate them. That's delusional, right? I mean, if somebody says, I'm seeing aliens coming to get me, and you can tell, well, there's no aliens here, well, that person has delusional thinking, right? Not only in terms of seeing something that is not there, but having the idea they're coming to pick him or her up, right? That is the same thing that happens to a lot of people together, right? The dynamics of why people end up believing irrational thoughts, it's a little more complicated than the individual, because you're getting into something in psychiatry we call a shared delusional process, in which everybody ends up in the same bubble, if you may, right? And everybody believes the same thing, and everybody reacts to the lack of reality in very aggressive and defensive terms, right? Let me give you an example. When I deal on a day-to-day basis with people who are paranoid, right? I have to be extremely careful, especially if delusionally paranoid. I have to be very careful of not questioning their delusions, right?
Why is that?
Because if I question the delusion, the first thing that they do is, why is he questioning my delusion, right? And I become part of the delusional process. And that happens a lot with shared delusions, right? The more you attack,
Mm.
the more there is a barrier and defense and pointing the finger that in psychiatry we call projection, and said, you must be part of the problem too.
So anybody questioning it actually fuels the fire, really, of their delusion.
Correct.
Hmm.
Because you're actually challenging some very basic concepts that keep together the group, right? So we went to the Q process, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, where a lot of the stuff that we're talking about was pretty delusional
Mm.
and provenly non-factual, right? But still, you had a group of people that believe a lot of crazy stuff. I don't like to use the word crazy too much as a psychiatrist, because I think is kind of has a negative connotation. But what they were talking about was probably more delusional than some of the stuff that I see with schizophrenia.
Wow, interesting. I mean, I remember the Pizzagate thing back in the day, and the one gentleman who, and people don't know this, some people know the story, who took it so far, he decided, I have to protect these children who are being trafficked or whatever it was. Went to the pizza parlor that was supposedly where I think it was Hillary Clinton was selling kids. Walked right in with his AR-15, his guns, and all that. Went to the back and realized, oh, this is really just a restaurant. was arrested, and a couple months later realized, wow, yeah, I started believing something that I didn't have any actual data to support, other than the disinformation that was being sent directly to him through certain channels. And I don't know if he was a QAnon guy or not, but it's a very interesting article to hear what he thinks now versus what he did. But he truly believed, so much so that he took action.
Yes, I mean, and that happens every day, right? Um, we do we it happens in the United States frequently, and it's not a new thing, you know. I remember when I was growing up, and I'm talking about 60s and 70s, early 80s, when we had that religious group, you know, where there was a massive suicide, homicide thing that happened. I think it
Oh,
was
and Jim
some
Jones in Guyana. Yeah.
June Jones. That is another example. So this always existed, but you know, usually gets magnified when you get a charismatic figure
Mhm.
that leads, right? Because is the
Well, Jim
leader that you have to follow.
Jim Jones, Charles Manson. I mean, we've seen there's the history is rife with extremist groups with a charismatic, either the Nazi Party. Um,
No, we can add
we
Donald
could go on
Trump.
and on and on. Yeah.
I mean, we can add Donald Trump as a charismatic leader, right? I mean, people perceived him as being strong, decisive, right? Uh, that he would sold a lot of promises, right? That not unusually promises are lies because they can be kept for a lot of reality reasons. Um, but when we bring it into today and we talk about the party of Putin, I mean, it's all on video, right? You can go back and look at the first couple of meetings between Trump and Putin, you know, what he basically said, I believe Putin more than I believe my own intelligence agencies, right? And
Hmm.
this is not something that I'm making up, it is there,
Yep, it's
right?
on the video. Absolutely.
And a number of things like that, right? I mean, his attachment to authoritarian figures that had a strong character and a lot of power. So, for some reason, a lot of people fell enchanted by that, meaning by connection with you and supporting you, I am like you.
Mm,
I want to be like you. But I think that there's a more um, evilish type of motivation that has led all of this for a long period of time. And it's not rare that most of what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, including in Russia, kind of tilts toward white supremacy, right? I mean, a lot of what happened on January 6th, you know, the invasion of the Capitol, um, a lot of that had very high white supremacist tones.
hmm
And there were a number of white supremacist groups that were very supportive of the whole movement, right? And I don't say that white supremacy should be negated. I mean, they have the right to express their opinions. They don't have the right to invade other people's space and invade other people's safety. Uh, but I think that if we are to be a democracy, we have to be willing to accept a lot of different ideologies, but not make moral connections between one and the other, right? Because what these groups have ended up doing is a lot of moral equivalences, right?
hmm
I mean, I invade the Capitol on January 6th, but you created a mess in Seattle or in Oregon, you know, during the support of black supremacy. And I don't think that black supremacy is a good term because they weren't asking for that. Now, I don't like violence. I actually have to deal with violence on a day-to-day basis in terms of how to bring that violence and intensity down every day. But the reality is that when we start making moral equivalencies, we normalize violence.
hmm
And a lot of what we're dealing with today is the normalization of violence. And the problem with the party of Putin, meaning those in the mostly Republican Party, okay, have really created a new axis of axis of evil, right? We used to talk about Iran, North Korea, Iraq, uh, but now we're talking about Russia.
Hmm.
We're talking about Belarus, and we can probably add on the disinformation axis Fox News, right?
Absolutely.
And a bunch of other people. So the new axis of evil is Belarus, Russia, and Fox News, right? And it's sad because what I hear, and even people in Fox News, and I listen to them all the time, they come out with these explanations of why they lie. They don't negate the lies, they
Yeah.
just explain them, right?
Hmm.
It's like that is really sad to see people who are grown ups who are purposely disinforming their audience with ulterior motives. And then they come back and say, well, yeah, I lied to you, but I had a reason to lie. So that makes my lie okay.
Okay. Yeah. We talked briefly before the show, the concept of the clash of civilizations, which is a book that was written, and it's a political concept that in the future we're going to have to s- basically have the enemies. Our enemies of the future are going to be China and India, and in order for us to combat that, and what I mean by us is kind of what you said, the Anglo-Saxon Christian white race. Do that, they must reunify, and the original concept was to get Russia back into the fold, make them a friend. Sound familiar? And then once they're back in, alienate Europe a little bit, bring Russia back into the fold, and then bring Europe back in as a unified force. This is definitely throwing a wrinkle into it. But when things change and the chess pieces move, and maybe there's a new side to it, but it definitely seems like you say some of the stuff that occurs with the white supremacy, or even just racial hatred, is pushing us into back to these larger groups, quite Orwellian when you think about it, in order to get us ready for the next couple generations of warfare and fear in order to be controlled.
Yeah, you see, whenever you mix race, religion, and politics,
Uh,
that's a bad combination. And I'm not talking about just right now. I'm talking about the history of the world, right? Um, and unfortunately, uh, there are actually some biological reasons for that.
hmm.
Um, if
Such
you
as.
if you know if you think about historically, who were the most dominant cultures in the world for a very long time? And you can see that most of those cultures were based in the Mediterranean circle of the world, right? And we can talk about the Aztecs, the Mayans, we can talk about the Romans, the Greeks, okay? We can talk about the Middle East, you know. We can talk about China and India. I mean, areas of the world with a classic tradition of culture, right? And who were the barbarians during those times, right?
Hmm.
And we're talking about thousands of years. The barbarians were people from the north, the ones who call themselves white supremacists now, the Vikings, Normandy, Russia, okay? And one of the reasons people in those parts of the world tend to be more aggressive is because survival in that part of the world required more aggressiveness. I mean, not only from the perspective of knowledge, from the perspective of physical strength and violence, right? So, what happened over the last couple of thousand years is that things got reversed. The barbarians took over the world, right? And I mean, people may not know, but half of my family comes from England, right?
Hmm.
The Anglo Saxon. Uh, so I do carry some of that, right? But the reality is that now the ones who control the world, are the bellicose ones, the aggressive ones, the ones that want to solve all the problems by aggression. Now, you combine that biological drive with religion, which becomes basically an excuse. And I have to say, I mean, the worst enemy of humanity has always been the human being, right? I mean, that's like a
Absolutely.
and then when you add religion to it, you add an excuse for humans to hate each other.
Yeah, it justifies it ethically and morally.
Exactly. And then you add race. You're different than me. So now we have you're different than me. You believe different than me. Okay. And uh, I tend to be more aggressive than you. So you're going to do what I tell you to do. Hence the Ukrainian war.
Mm.
I mean, you can actually summarize it from that perspective. Um, and it's a bunch of lies. I mean, unfortunately, I don't just want to call it misinformation. It's delusional. It's out of the reality realm in terms of the basis for what is happening there, and it really kind of breaks my heart to see the images of the mothers and the children escaping bombs. Right? Who in the right mind throws bombs into a house with their children and mothers? Right?
Yeah, in the 21st century, right? We're supposed to be past all this, deterrence after post World War, reconstruction of all sorts of things in all societies. We are literally have supposed to have been past this, and it almost feels like we're taking a huge step back to pre-Cold War, bellicose
Yeah, but you
movement.
see, one of my concerns, and that comes to the mental health part of this. One from the delusional part of the ones doing it, and the other one from the stress related issues from the ones who are receiving it, is the issue that um, we didn't learn anything from the terrorists, right?
Mm.
We just became terrorists. So basically, we decided, hey, if they were doing that to us, now we're going to do it to them because what they're doing is terrorism. Let's call it what it is. It's not war, it's not invasion, it's terrorism. Right? You're terrorizing 40 million people in a country that is less strong than you, right? To get what? I really don't know what the aim is besides this grandiose delusional idea that I want to have an empire like somebody had in the early 1900s, right? That's sad. It's really
Yeah,
sad.
there's definitely some strategic issues there with Ukraine and energy, the nuclear weapons that were positioned there before the fall apart of the Soviet Union. But you said something kind of interesting, where in our last show we discussed how it's become a battle between democracy, the words of, and the power of the people, and individuals with authoritarianism. And I think what is being shown now is really why that's so incredibly dangerous. If you give, even if people are happy and comfortable in their lives, which they give away lots of power to whomever, as long as they're comfortable. Once that person who is in power decides to do something a little weird, you don't really have a choice but to support them if you're not in a democracy, and you definitely couldn't prevent them from doing it in something that's not a democracy. So it really, I think, goes to show where we could have gone, or we still could potentially go, if we allow our system that is being questioned every day to disappear.
Well, you see, the way I look at it is that, and again, maybe I'm over optimistic, but I do believe that the a significant majority of the United States population, regardless of color of skin or regardless of um, religion, or political leaning, they're good people.
Mm.
They want what everybody else wants. They want democracy, they want peace, they want to have a saying on what happens to their future. They want to make a living and a little extra so they can have a good retirement. And we get distracted by noise. And what happens is the party of Putin on the left, on the right, and then we have uh, some people on the left who are pulling and gaining on loudness. Their messages are loud. And I have to tell you, I mean, I have a lot of criticism for the left too, right?
Mm. Oh, absolutely.
And I have a lot of criticism for the right. I'm not making a moral equivalency, right? But most people are in the middle. And the problem is they treasure democracy to a point because they don't want to be inconvenienced. And
Oh, yes.
what we're living with right now is that democracy is becoming inconvenient,
It
right?
does, and for democracies to function, people have to work. People have to make effort. People have to educate themselves. They have to be knowledgeable. And you're right, it's becoming work, which is sad.
Well, and then you want to keep it, you have to vote.
Yep.
And to vote, they're making it difficult. So you have to get out of your home and you have to go and vote. Well, get up and vote. I mean, we can spend hours, endless hours, arguing online about how difficult it is to vote, but it's worth it.
My father came from a country where there was a dictator. And I remember when I didn't have a lot of time with him, as you know, but when I did, one time I asked him, I said, "So what was it like?" And he told me some things, and I'll never forget it. He looked at me, and says, "Son, the most important thing you can ever do in this country is vote."
Yes, and I have to tell you, I also come from a country where it's terribly corrupt. Okay, and we had a one-party system for 70 years, and now it's a mess. You know, we went to some different changes, uh, in which the authoritarian face is kind of influencing politics in Mexico too. And people don't realize how worth democracy is until you don't have it,
Mm,
right? And that's kind of a little late, right? Because what happens with when you lose democracy or you've never had it, right, is that the politicians become too powerful. Look at what's happened with Putin in Russia, right?
hmm
People can't vote. He can be voted out. Um, I mean, the press is basically turned off. He just turned on the spigot. There's no press anymore. Only whatever the state says. And when you have lived in a country that does that, right, where you are oppressed by dictate, right, then you realize how great democracy is, right? And actually, for our people, for the Hispanic people, I do have to say the fact that you have less democracy today than you did 6 years ago, okay, doesn't mean that it's still a good thing, right?
hmm
Because that you're on your way of losing it, and we all have to remember what it was like to live in Mexico, in Honduras, and Guatemala, and Nicaragua, in El Salvador when there was no democracy, right? We don't want to go back there. So we need to move away from the delusional thinking that there's a great leader that is going to do it for us. I lived that in Mexico for many years, you know, where Mexico is a country where the president is basically totally powerful.
hmm
I mean, no different than what you see in Russia right now. I mean, it's kind of covered up with elections, if you may, right? But it's the same thing, and it's been the same thing for 100 years, and people get used to it, right? And you go on with your business, but you have no freedom.
Yeah, I think people, like I say, they're so comfortable as long as they can have their football, their beer, their whatever. They don't care, but they don't realize that if leader makes a decision, again, like someone like Putin right now making a decision that hits you at a human level, and you realize, wait a minute, I can't believe he's doing this. But they allowed him to have that type of power. That's the real power of democracy. It's to keep the people keeping their leaders in check. And people here complain about our government, how corrupt it is, and how yada yada yada. They have no idea unless you've lived in a country with a dictator, with someone with authoritarian power, how much freedom we do have and how much effect we can have. But it's through our vote, and as you mentioned last time, through our pocketbook.
Well, that's the other part, right? I mean, we can easily modify systems, and it happens all the time. Look what the United States and Europe are doing to Russia. They're controlling the pocketbook, right? They're putting sanctions to prevent it from being able to support their invasion. But the reality is that we also talked last week when we were meeting with some other people. We talked about the idea that we need to have better balance, right? Things are so radical that people who are asking for more freedom are asking for more freedom in ways that they'll get less freedom, right?
Mhm.
By moving to the authoritarian. I mean, that is less freedom, but so it's kind of paradoxical. Uh, on the other side, you have people asking for more government intervention and control of people's lives, right? But they don't want to let go of capitalism, right? So can we have like a middle ground somewhere? I mean, it's kind of difficult nowadays, but I said something that I was kind of controversial the other day, and I said, okay, So instead of saying zero white supremacy and zero racism, can we have a little bit of it?
Hmm.
How much can be tolerated, right? Can I tolerate some Nazis in the United States, and can they tolerate a couple of communists in the United States? You know, while the middle, the big percentage of the people are pro democracy. I mean, I really find the left and the right arguments tremendous food for discussion, right? And to bring people into a center idea that in order for us to be able to have freedom and democracy, we have to sacrifice something.
Hmm.
Okay. And one of the things that we have to sacrifice is that we have to give up a little freedom. Okay. And we have to have more control of the finances. And we have to make sure that we have a process by which I can say, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't have to like it. Can we agree to disagree? You know? I mean, I understand that I would like everybody to have the same salary in the United States, but that's not how this country was evolved and developed and is not supportive of the traditional capitalism, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to understand that money don't come from the air. You know, you can just go out and get money out of trees. It's a whole process that has been managed in the world since the beginning of time. You know, I mean, people may like, but I'm going to say or not like it, but it's all about trade. But not
Absolutely.
only about trade of products, the trade of ideas, okay, and trade of communication and tolerance and trade of understanding, right, and compassion. So we have to be able to understand that the reason we have laws is that the laws were the translation of our moral values into a compromise into what's right and wrong.
Mm.
Yeah. I
And the
mean,
best way for us to coexist is to accept a certain portion of it. Problem is, right now, it seems that everybody, their way is the only way, and they refuse to accept things. I remember after the election, I had a person I know looked at me, he goes, "I can't believe so and so lost by so many votes." And I said, "Why?" He says, "I don't know anybody who voted for that other person." I said, "Really? I do." And it's because they've never associated with anybody other than people in their little group. And I said, I actually do. I thought, my reality is very different than yours because of that flow of information.
yeah, and again, we have to be honest, and that's where voting with our pocket becomes important, right? In terms of demanding that we're giving information and we're allowed to make our own opinions, because people don't get information anymore; they just get
They get
opinions, right?
opinions,
And
and that's
we need to start. I mean, that's very insulting for people in general to tell them you have to believe what I tell you because I tell you.
uh, but if you get people used to that, there's that change in behavior. But I like you what you said. I have faith. Some of these younger kids, at least the ones I know, like my stepdaughter, they know everything they get in their phone is algorithm driven. They know none of it's 100%, and then they know that they have to take whatever data they get and use some critical thinking skills and say, okay. What makes sense here? I think a lot of the older people definitely don't do that. They really think the news or whatever news source they choose is the truth, and any other news source is a lie. Again, back to that binary. It's either black or white, this or that, truth or false. The younger kids seem to already realize that, and it gives me hope for the future, at least.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I have a lot of hope on those kids. I also strongly believe that sometimes they don't communicate with us because they're really ashamed of our stupidity.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I mean, and I see it with my kids sometimes. They don't want to discuss things with me, not because they're afraid of me contaminating their brains, but because they're ashamed of a lot of adults. I mean, think about your own kid going to a school board meeting today, right? And
Hmm.
having the mom yelling and screaming because she's not getting her way. That's shameful for the kid. I mean, the kids has to go back to school. It has to do with their friends and the teachers, and so I see the kids kind of moving away, but probably for the right reason. They're protecting themselves.
Yeah, and as long as we get through the process and continue on, was it Benjamin Franklin when they left the Constitutional Convention? I guess the lady asked him, "What did you give us?" And of course, he said a republic based on democratic principles, democracy. He says a republic if you can keep it, and
Exactly.
he didn't say if we can keep it, the leaders. He said, "You, the people. If you, the people, can keep it, it will continue. Hopefully, this experiment will continue. The republic will reign, and democracy will keep going through." Once again, Doctor, appreciate your time, folks joining us live, and please like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take
Hey,
care.
thank you. You have a good night.